Meanwhile, states are doing their part to fight against NSA surveillance. In Maryland, the home of the NSA, a group of state congressmen introduced a bill that would literally pull the plug on government spying. They would do this by cutting off water, electricity, and other support to the federal agency. It's called the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, and supporters say the bill is aimed at blocking the NSA from monitoring and tracking citizens in the state. Here's the bill that prohibits state offices and employees from engaging in certain activities relating to the collection of certain electronic data or metadata of a person. And it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop in Maryland. There's legislation just like this in the works in other states like Washington, Utah, and Missouri. For more on the state's fight, I'm joined by Shahid Buttar, Executive Director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. Welcome, Shahid.
Thanks for having me on.
So this bill would make life pretty tough for the NSA to operate in Maryland. Tell us more about what it would do if it were to become law, because I understand that you've been involved in drafting this legislation or similar legislation.
In Maryland and Utah in particular, it would have special force because the bill essentially denies state resources to the NSA. And in the states where the NSA has data centers, like Maryland, like Utah, that would include pulling the plug on public utilities, like the water that the NSA uses to cool the servers, amounting to 2 million gallons per day in the Bluffdale, Utah data center, as well as the electricity that they use to power the servers. So even while Congress decides what to do and the courts decide what to do and the president continues to step closer, one hopes, towards the positions he espoused as a campaign candidate back in 2008, the states can take matters into their own hands, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Maryland, Utah, and a dozen other states around the country.
And as you had mentioned, Maryland is a big hub for the NSA. They are based at the headquarters at Fort Meade.
That's right.
So what is the particular significance of this bill happening in Maryland, where the NSA primarily operates? I mean, we've seen various states adopt similar legislation or think about enacting this kind of legislation.
Yeah.
It's got to have even more of a larger effect in Maryland.
To describe it in metaphor, if domestic surveillance is a dragon and the effort to fight it in cities is one scale at a time and Congress is chopping off its head, going after the NSA data centers in Maryland and Utah is like taking a swipe at the jugular. And we could quite easily, I think, to the extent those states see fit to step forward, stop this sordid enterprise, whether or not the Washington institutions wake up and remember what the Fourth Amendment means.
Going for the jugular, as you put it. A bill like this, though, was vetoed, as I understand, in California. So it's hard to get laws like this passed. Is it more of a symbolic move, or what do you think?
I don't think it's symbolic at all. What it actually will queue up, and to my knowledge, there hasn't been a veto of this bill anywhere in the country yet. It might have been a similar bill in a different era. But the particular challenge that bills like this will face are lawsuits alleging federal supremacy with respect to foreign policy. They'll say that the NSA is a foreign policy instrument, that states don't have the authority to make their own foreign policy, and that's certainly true. But whether or not states have the authority to direct their own public utilities is a pretty settled question, and there's no actual legitimate argument that would suggest that the federal government has the right to commandeer those state resources. So it actually pits, like most constitutional law, two very compelling interests against each other: the state's plenary authority over its resources against federal supremacy with respect to matters left by the Constitution in federal hands. Left out of that equation, and what I think will resolve those issues ultimately, is the forgotten relevance of the Fourth Amendment, which quite simply makes this government enterprise illegal in the first instance, and so the states taking action to advance constitutional principles will be interpreted very differently by a court than a state taking action to restrict them.
Yeah, and it's these very concerns, Fourth Amendment concerns, that these states are trying to bring to the forefront here. Meanwhile, a panel of privacy experts that reviewed the NSA surveillance program testified before a Senate committee here in Washington not too long ago. It's a panel of members of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. They took questions from senators about their findings. Want to take a listen to a member of this group, Rachel Brand.
This program has been operating for years. It's been the subject of numerous judicial opinions. The legality of it will ultimately be resolved in cases that are currently pending in the courts. It just struck me as gratuitous and unnecessary to also say the program is illegal, because that has a very demoralizing and negative effect on the intelligence community. You want your intelligence agencies to aggressively protect the national security within the bounds of the law. You don't want them to be timid and be scared of the rug being pulled out from under them.
And this is an argument that we heard from senators today, saying that this board, while they should provide some oversight, might have gone too far, and it's not really their arena to discuss or find out or rule on the legality of it. What do you think? I
think those senators and Ms. Brand should probably read the 9/11 Commission report that recommended the creation of this board to do exactly that. I think they're making this argument because they're uncomfortable with what the board has decided, and what the board has decided is the same thing that the founders of our country decided 250 years ago, which was that mass surveillance is not American. It's that simple, actually. It's not a particularly complicated question. And the PCLOB was well within its ambit of its institutional authority in reaching a conclusion about the legality of these programs and correctly deciding that they can't possibly comply with the Fourth Amendment.
Interesting. Mr. Buttar, great to have you on. That was Shahid Buttar, the Executive Director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee.